So this is a webinar obviously on fight or flight mechanism. Some of you may have heard this term a lot. Some of you, this may be a very new term, and that's okay, because we're going to break it down and really get to know what fight or flight actually is and how it's sort of transformed over human civilization. And obviously the title of this webinar is Understanding Crisis in Our Day-to-Day Lives. So we're going to go a little deeper into what that means, and I'll obviously provide some tips and some new resources with which you can use or you can consider using at the end of this webinar. So we're going to start I'll give it 1 more minute. And standard rules, guys, since it is a smaller group, you are always free to interrupt me if you want to switch your microphone on. If you do have background noise, though, I do ask that during the duration, you just keep it off while I am speaking, but if you wish to interrupt for whatever reason or ask a question, you can obviously switch the microphone on then. Otherwise, you can write in the chat box, but because I do have the window minimized, I might not see it straight away. So if it's a very urgent question, just put your microphone on and say, hi, Jessica. And if there's any questions about the information that I provide, as I said, you're free to interrupt me then and there, or if you feel like it's something can wait till the end, it's probably better because we will have some time, about maybe between 10 minutes and 15 minutes for questions. Hi, Rua. Welcome everybody. Thank you so much. I was just explaining to Krutika that I think it's a time where everybody's with family and having dinner, and so it's very much precious time, this time of the evening. So it's so lovely that you're choosing to share your time with me and to come on and to hear about this topic. So I'm so grateful that you're all here. Okay, I think I'm going to start. All right, and if anybody joins midway, then we will hopefully they'll just go with the flow. It's all pretty standard. So welcome everybody. For those who don't know me, or this is your very first time coming to any of my experiential webinars, seminars, or teachings, my name is Jessica Canero. I'm an Australian therapist working here at Illuminations, Dubai. And my modalities that I focus on are hypnotherapy, transpersonal regression therapy. I'm also a family constellations practitioner, a counselor, and a coach. So I utilize a wide variety of different techniques during my services that I offer here, and in my therapy, I often, depending of course on who comes and what the issue is, I utilize a variety of these techniques. So yes, you can always find me here at Illuminations at any time. All right, so that is the introduction about me. And now, as I said, for those who have just joined, this is a webinar called Fight or Flight, Understanding Crisis in Our Day-to-Day Lives. Now, I will be splitting the webinar into 3 parts. Yeah, the first will be specifically on what is fight or flight. What is the fight or flight mechanism? Some of us may know a little bit, some of us may not know much at all. Some may be complete experts, in which I hope that at least I offer you something new to digest. Then we're going to spend the second part talking about crisis specifically. So what is actually crisis, and how has crisis developed over the years of human civilization? So what was our understanding of crisis hundreds of thousands of years ago to what it is now? And of course, last part, focusing on our day-to-day lives. So where we are at now and how crisis is understood now, and how we can use this to our advantage and what we can do to work with this. So first thing, let's go straight into the burning question. What is fight or flight? Now, as I said, we hear a lot about this. We hear this terminology that it's an updated form of our survival mechanism. It's, it's the survival mechanism of animals, and et cetera, et cetera. And a lot of this is all essentially true. It's all part of one concept. So fight or flight, by definition, is a biological, instinctual response for dealing with danger. Okay, so I'll say that again. It is a biological, instinctual response for dealing with danger. Now, what does that mean? Specific focus here on biological. That means obviously that it's part of our system. It's self-regulated, it's there, it's present. So it is actually something that we are born with, right? So it's not something that can be changed. It's obviously the same effect for every single human that is born, and it is very much a part of our ingrained programming, let's say, as a human species, as a mammal species. So let's start with how it used to be, or what fight or flight mechanism has been, you know, hundreds of thousands of years ago when we were in the primitive ages of mankind. So human existence at one point in time, hard to imagine now, but at one point in time we know was as primitive as the animal existence. So there was essentially very little that was separating the human from the animal. Now, how did animals live back then? We understand that animals lived by instinct. Okay, I think we would all agree on this. And today, we still see this today, that the majority of animals that we either see out in the wild, even in the zoo, because obviously containment doesn't change an animal's instinct. If anything, it can suppress it, but it cannot contain it or change it. So we understand that they live by instinct. Now, your instinct is what keeps you alive. So your instinct is directly connected to the intention or the motivation to keep you alive. Okay? Now, we have three basic instincts that obviously connect us as humans to the animal as well. Now, before we go into those three basic instincts, what do we understand about instinct? Officially, it's called a sensory perception that initiates a drive. So it is a sensory perception that initiates a drive or a reason to act, to survive. So there's an act behind it, okay? That we get an instinct to do something or to act in a certain way. So what are our three basic instincts? Pretty obvious. Number one is hunger. You can't survive without it. Therefore, if you don't eat after a certain period of time, your body will provide that instinct of hunger to force you to get up and find food. Now, back then, it might have been finding food in the wildlife. Now it's just walking a couple of, meters to your refrigerator. But either way, the instinct is the same. Second is sleep. So obviously, this is something that is primal to our need to survive. Sleep is essential to self-regulation, okay? It is essential to the brain's health. It is essential to the body's health. So we understand that without sleep, again, it wouldn't be possible at that point. You would not be able to cope without sleep after a certain period of time, but we need it. It is directly linked to our survival. And sex, which is, of course, procreation, reproduction, which the initial reaction or the initial desire for it is very much instinctual as a way to procreate, to keep the species going, to keep our genes passed through, all of this, right? So as animals do as well, so do we. These are our three main instincts, and this does not change, has not changed over the course of civilization. Now, one moment. Okay, all right, so essentially hunger, sleep, sex, or food, rest, and procreation. So there was no concept of family back in those times, yeah? There was no concept of, there was concepts of tribes, but no concept of like, we are a family and we are separate, right? Tribes could have been numerous families, right? It could have been tens or, a good maybe couple of, maybe up to 10 families in one tribe. So there was no real concept of family. There was no concept of religion. Okay, so this is all very new nuances in humanity, and there was no concept of territorial boundaries back then. So fossilized discoveries that obviously scientists have been and are still working on today show us that every million years the brain doubled in size. Okay, so every million years they continue to see the enlargement of the human brain. As the brain doubles in size, there is an increased neuron packaging of the brain. So the basic neurons that actually humanity started off with were 302 neurons, which you can imagine is absolutely tiny in comparison to what we have now. This is the same amount of neurons that a ringworm has in their brain. Now, over the course of how many years, we have 86 billion neurons. So you can imagine how much the brain has changed. So essentially, this is the progression from the Homo erectus to the Homo sapien. If any of you have read that book, Homo sapien and Homo Deus by Yuval Noah Harris, I highly recommend it. It's a beautiful book that actually goes very much into this topic today, but of course at a much, much deeper level. Mind rendering. So What did all of these 86 billion neurons do? They made us think cognitively. So this is the very first step that man kind of made to go beyond the animal, which is when we started to go beyond instinct and think, actually use our ability to think, or the ability to think started to develop in mankind. It enabled us to go beyond or think beyond our sensory perception. Right? So there's our survival, which is linked to our instinct, right? So we don't need anything other than our instinct really to just survive, because our instinct will ensure that we survive. But when we start to think, cognition gives us the ability to go beyond survival. Now, what would be beyond survival? Beyond survival is essentially about improving the chances of survival, but we're going to get into that shortly. So essentially how we got to this point of going beyond sort of primal instincts is largely due to neural patterns, right? So with this sort of expansion in neural patterns, the more neurons, the more that you can process information that went beyond the body. So instinct very much keeps us in the body. Cognition allows us to think outside of the body, right? Does that all make sense so far? Cool. So as neurons grow, we became aware of the world around us, right? So this takes us outside of the body. So now we're thinking beyond instinct. Now we're actually analyzing. This is where the senses come in. We're able to look at the world around us. Once cognition developed to a point where we were able to start thinking, observing the world around us, this started the development of memory. Okay, before this, memory was not needed, because instinct implies that you do what you do now, and then you do what you do in the next second. Whatever you instinctively feel like doing, you do in that moment. So what would be the purpose of memory then? But now memory becomes a reality. Memory and storage, the ability to store those memories, started growing. Okay, now why is the purpose of this? What's actually the purpose of memory? Memory is essentially a natural technology of the brain that allows us to process and keep information that we can pass on to the next generation. So what happens with animals, right? They have their own experiences, as an example, and then they have their own children, and their children may essentially, or their own offspring, and the offspring may end up repeating the same patterns, and this is why maybe animals don't grow necessarily in numbers or become endangered. So they repeat the same patterns of their species. When we have memory, the whole idea comes back to improving our ability to survive, because we have experiences as a species, and then we have our offspring, and then with the hope and the ability of memory slowly being able to develop, we can pass on our own experiences and therefore hope to improve their survival in a way that maybe wasn't as easy for us. Now, this is obviously the ability to learn at the very beginning stages of being able to learn through other people's experiences. Only us as humans can do this. No other animal, amazingly so, can do this. No other animal has the capacity to remember and adjust accordingly. And this is, we're talking about passing on to the offspring. Of course, there are animals, like we know, as example, dogs, cats, they can remember traumas. But this is essentially about the focus of passing information on, keeping long-term memories for the prospect of their offspring. Okay, we are the only animals or mammals that can do this. Okay, this is all due to the discovery of something which we call mirror neurons. How many of us have heard this? This goes around a lot, the concept of mirror neurons. So our brain has evolved enough to be able to see someone else doing something and create a muscle memory from it, or an assumption from it that changes our behavior. Guys, this is the basis essentially of law of attraction, mind power, coaching, the entire motivational fields, right? The entire ability of like coaching and being able to help people, empathy, understand someone else's, experiences and be able to learn from them. This is all based off this. So if we didn't have mirror neurons, this whole motivational, this world, this billion-dollar industry would not exist, right? So going back to primitive ages or primitive life, right? So we have cognition now, right? This is where we're at now. We have cognition, so thoughts were able to be developed. Now, like I mentioned before, if you are able to start thinking, so we're not just acting on instinct now, we're getting to a point where we are able to think about things. What would we want to be thinking about, or where would these thoughts be focused on most likely? Most likely, we would be looking at our environment. So again, it goes beyond how to survive, because instinct allows us to do that. Now it moves to how can I improve my survival chances? How can I improve my survival story? How can I improve my day-to-day life? So it's not just about getting through the day. How can I increase my chances of getting through the week, getting through the month, really enhancing the whole part of survival, the whole story of surviving, right? And really having a life. So back then, primitive ages, we would understand that life was a battle between animal and man. Okay, essentially animals were our biggest threats, alongside, of course, hostile weather and freak accidents and all of these sorts of things. So man started to think about, what did I need to do, or what do I need to do to improve survival? Makes sense, right? So this is when we started to get the development of fire, using how to build fire. We taught ourselves how to essentially make a fire. Obviously created primitive weapons from wood and from other natural resources, building shelters, and living in groups. So living in groups was actually, again, something that developed with cognition, is that the understanding started to come in that the chances, the more likely we are to band together, the higher our chance of survival, right? So one thing to remember or to understand about this is that the focus on starting to merge together and live as groups was never coming from a place of wanting to bond, okay? This has originated not from the idea or the desire to bond. It was actually at its very beginnings a survival tactic. So all we want to do is survive. We don't really care about bonding with each other. It's actually about banding together to survive, because if you do this and I do this and we can take care of something as a group, then that means our chances are better. So that's where it started. Bonding came later, okay? So if we stay in groups, now it's possible to kill. Now we are more powerful as a species, right? If 6 of us are fighting one threat, then the chances of us killing it are far greater, right? So survival goes up. Increase, go up. Stay safe, go up. So divvying out work, another way to increase our chances of surviving, right? Because we don't all have to be doing the same work. What if we kind of allocate and, assign different tasks to different people in the group? So as an example, you would have, one part of the group that's, delegated to resting, and another part of the group would be delegated to guarding the resting place. So then all of you would end up being safe while equally divvying out what is necessary. Right? So it makes sense. Rationality is what all of this is. So one of our basic tactics is that, and something very important to understand, is that animals trace humans by smell. Okay, we all pretty much understand this. So what would that have developed to is that now we come to an awareness that if this animal is tracing us by smell, what if we start to divvy things up, the activities that we need to do? We started to look at different locations. So we started to get an awareness of how to trick the animal. So what if we cook in one place and we defecate in another place, and then we sleep in another place? So if we become nomadic and we move, then this gives us a higher chance of surviving against the animal, because the minute that I'm cooking in this one place, the animal will come roaming to see what's there. By the time they come and they reach that campsite, you've already moved to the next place to use the bathroom, and then you use the bathroom. By that time, the animal's gone there, but you're no longer there because you're now sleeping in another place. So thinking, logic, way to increase survival. And guys, interestingly, and I just love this concept because it's just so true, is like this is the first awareness of interior design. Look at the way our houses are built now, if you want proof of this. So you have your kitchen in one space, you have your bathroom in another space, and you have your bedroom in another space. You don't do these things all in one room. So you see how cognition and civilization and this realization that our primitive ancestors had, we still seeps into these amazing modern day designed homes that we have, right? Because there's a logic behind it, but it was essentially based in survival. So now we're moving away from free living to community. Okay, so now it's not every man for himself. Now, because we want to increase our chances of survival, we are now living in community. And what does a community mean? A community implies that there are going to be rules. So now, if there's all of us, the rules, like the rule is you have to you have to cook while this group is resting, or you have to do this while that. So now we're introducing the concept of rules, because that's what makes a community work, right? And essentially, if the rules worked and the community was happy and everybody was able to increase their chances of survival, then there was an agreement on these rules, okay? There was a unity there. So as I said, what we share with this animal kingdom is the fight or flight response. It's an inborn animal instinct of survival. So whenever there is a crisis, okay, the response is to run or to fight. Standard, okay? It's ingrained. So as I said, the chances of how this would work, an example, right, of how this would work is that, let's say we have a primitive man, okay? Have a primitive man, and he's in that part of the group that is going out to find dinner for the evening. And he has managed to come across a huge bear. And this bear is about 15 feet away. Now, what's this man thinking? Okay, because remember, we are at a point now where we have developed cognition. So this man is now thinking, because he can think, okay, this bear is huge. I have very little chance of survival if I fight this bear. Okay, because all it's going to take is a matter of one swipe and I'm gone. All right, but I also understand that if I run away, it's going to chase me. And it's a bear, so all it's going to take is a matter of seconds before it chases after me, and boom, end of story. So the thinking developed even further, and this is where a third response developed. So this is not an organic response. This is actually something that came as a consequence of cognition. The third response, which we all have heard about before, is the freeze response. What if, or the playing dead response, what if I fall to the ground and pretend to play dead? Because that is going to be my best chance to survive this. So now, new thought, new neural activity, new behavior or response to a crisis. So I might be able to confuse the animal by simply just falling to the ground and playing dead. And if the animal's not in a temperamental mood, if it's not too hungry, then it might just go, oh, okay, and it might just walk off. And we see this play out actually in many National Geographic videos, that many animals use this technique of playing dead, because the thrill of the kill, as they say, is that the animal loves the chase. The minute that the animal appears dead, it loses its interest, okay? But that's, of course, if there's not hunger involved. So there's this third now evolutionary response, playing dead. It becomes a response to crisis management, okay? But if there's fight, there's flight, now there's playing dead. What is this in modern day terms? Depression, okay? This is where it has developed to what we understand as depression. Depression, you often hear people say that it's psychologically, it is like playing dead, okay? The origin of depression as a disorder emerges from the playing dead response, okay? I cannot run, I cannot fight, I give up. I just lay still, I just play dead in the hopes that I'm left alone, okay? Look at the word depression. If we sort of take it apart, we hear de-pressure, right? So when I cannot handle the pressure, I use my self-evolved technique of depressurizing by going into a term that the medical world define now as depression. Now, of course, please understand, in these terminologies, I'm not pretending to associate this with the clinical disorder, okay? There's a lot of research that is being done about chemicals that are changing in the brain. All of this is completely different, okay? We are talking of the origin of the disorder now. It's far more complex in that sense. So this is, as I said, we're talking about the origin of the disorder, which was a choice that people made when they could not fight and they could not flight from a situation. Cool? So in modern day, balance, the fight response becomes the response of action. So what we see now that we are civilized is that when people go into that fight or flight response, when they go into the fight response, that is the response of action. So they do something about the crisis, they do something about the situation. Now flight becomes the response of avoidance. So this is when they go into the behavior of pulling back, withdrawing, avoiding completely, okay? Or running away, right? Both literally and figuratively. So it's not necessarily physical. It's something that we do in our minds as well. So let's go back a little bit to structure-based living. Okay, now we have this structure in our communities, in our tribes, more rules, more rules. What do more rules mean? More inhibitions. Okay, so less reliant on instinct and more reliant on these rules, which means that these instincts become imbibed, they get repressed, right? More inhibition. The more we become inhibited, the more we internalize our emotions. So you can start to see now how the development of civilization per se meant the development of rules, meant the development of society, which means that we had to internalize what was natural to us, which is our instinct, because then we started to put a moral slant on instinct, but we'll get to that in a moment. So our entire human body and our behavior is controlled by a neural network of nerves, okay? Most of our actions are voluntary, so what we want to do, we do, right? We understand this. There are a lot of involuntary functions as well, so there's respiration, there's circulation, there's heartbeat, etc., all of which is under a different set of nerves, and this is what we call the autonomic nervous system, okay? I think most of you would have heard that if you haven't before. It's very interesting. Have a read about it. Autonomic nervous system. So this is a part of our system that keeps us alive, right? It's not our choice. We have no choice in how this functions. Our body, it is the part of our body and our brain actually that really simplifies the process of keeping us alive. It doesn't care about anything else. So what does it do? It keeps us on autopilot. Okay, because autopilot is what is familiar, it is instinctual. So it is designed to ensure that we get through the day, every day, surviving physically. All right, so this autonomic nervous system, it has two parts to it. It has the sympathetic nervous system and it has the parasympathetic nervous system. Okay, now whenever the mind perceives danger or crisis, and that can be primitive or that can be modern day, this response kicks in first. Now, both responses need power. Please understand this. Fight and flight both need power. So physiologically, when the sympathetic nervous system kicks in, this is when the fight or flight kicks in, essentially. This is when the default is that your breathing will become quicker, your heartbeat goes faster, so it doubles. You start to hyperventilate, or you feel the need to hyperventilate. So the breathing is a lot faster, is a lot more rapid, is more sort of surface level, more in the chest, more in the throat. So we're getting blood moving away from the brain. So the blood moves past the brain and goes into the arms and into the legs, because these are the parts of our body that are designed to fight or flight, right? So our body produces neurotransmitters, which we understand now as epinephrine and cortisol, okay? Which we call the stress hormone for obvious reasons. So blood, sugar, pressure all increases. Blood pressure increases, immune system gets suppressed. So when all of these, the epinephrine, the cortisol, when these neurotransmitters are essentially sent or released into the body, the immune system shuts down, okay? Because now we're in fight or flight response. So this is our primary function here. Now, of course, then the heart races, more energy in the body. So this is what it's trying to do. It's trying to fill your body with epinephrine. It's trying to get your body like on a high, right? Ready to do whatever it is that you need to do to survive. Obviously, the more crisis, or the more you experience crisis, the more the resources will become available to you at that time, right? The bodily resources that you have internally. So as an example, like, I don't know if you guys have ever read any of these amazing stories, but this is how far it can go. There have been cases where a mother has seen an accident where maybe she's crossed the road with her child or something has happened, or even in an experience which I read about not that long ago actually, where a mother and a child were trapped in a car that caught on fire. And the mother managed to get out. The child couldn't, or she didn't manage to pull the child out with her. And she actually managed to go and rip open the door of the car to get to her child. So she went to the other side and managed to rip open a car door just with her bare hands. Now, can you imagine us doing this in a normal situation? Chances are we can't rip steel, we can't rip to that extent. We're not that strong, especially not with our bare hands, most of us, right? But in that moment, the cortisol, the epinephrine, the adrenaline that pumps through your body can allow you to perform feats of strength that you would never be able to perform in a normal situation. Another example of a mother and child, because for a mother and child, if a mother sees her child in distress, oh, that fight mechanism kicks in like nothing else. And for those of you who are mothers, I'm sure you'll understand that. So Another example is if a child is trapped under a car, mother or father would be able in that moment to lift the car up to be able to pull the child out. Now, again, the minute that the parasympathetic nervous system kicks in and the body relaxes, which is I'm going to explain in a moment, you would be unable to barely budge that car. But in that moment, that is the power that your body provides to you so that you can fight to survive. So essentially, we're dealing with sympathetic nervous system, okay? Fight and flight is regulated, more anxiety, more heartbeat, more energy. So either I'm going to fight this thing and I'm going to have my superhuman strength, or I'm going to run. And when I run, I'm going to be like Usain Bolt, okay? Now, if there's a hungry tiger, you'll beat Usain Bolt's record in 3 seconds flat, right? You'll run like you've never run before. So once the threat is over, okay? So at some point, there's a threat. Natural reaction, fight or flight, or sympathetic nervous system kicks in. At some point, the crisis ends. Now we're talking primitive ages. So the threat is very obvious. I see a tiger, I run. Let's say you manage to get up a tree, right? Congrats to you. So in that moment, you've survived. You sit in the tree, oh, thank God I survived. And then slowly, what's happening? Your breathing starts to slow down, your heartbeat starts to slow as well. And what's happening here is the parasympathetic nervous system, the response to bring you back to a state of homeostasis. Homeostasis just means stability. It's a fancy word for stability. The parasympathetic nervous system is what brings you back into that state of homeostasis, okay, where the body is now self-regulated, the immune system is reactivated. So, as I said, in primitive days, when the psychological or physiological rather changes were to allow you to be able to run away, get away, crisis averted, then essentially heartbeat goes back to normal. And this could happen multiple times a day if you're dealing with different crises. But the point is that the body is self-regulated. You experience it, sympathetic nervous system kicks in, crisis averted, parasympathetic system kicks in, body is back to normal, body self-regulated, okay? Now, so very straightforward, because our threats were very straightforward then, right? We see a scary tiger or a scary bear or a difficult, or a scary situation like a rock's about to fall on us. We understand that as a threat, and we understand, and the body understands it as well. Now we're dealing with modern day life. Now we're dealing with modern civilization. So now we don't walk out onto the streets and see tigers. Well, I mean, sometimes, I guess, depending on where you live in the world, but most of us are not going to walk out here and straight out into a wilderness. So what's changed? Now, the tiger has turned into the threat that is now your boss. And now you're dealing with a boss that is standing in front of you and screaming at you. And he becomes that new threat that is activating the same system, the autonomic nervous system. But here's where the complexity happens. Now the threat is your boss. And you're thinking, I'd really love to fight the situation. So the reaction kicks in as normal, autonomic nervous system, because it never falters. First initial reaction, fight. Well, I'd love to fight. I'd really like to fight and probably punch my boss in this moment. But if I fight, literally fight this situation, that means I'm going to get fired, chances are. So we're going to avert that. I'd love to run away. I'd love to just walk out this door and say, I'm done. I'm not coming back, right? Consider me resigned. But I have a family to feed. I have a household to provide for. So that's not an option either. I cannot fight. I cannot flight. I cannot fight. I cannot run. So what does this mean? Crisis doesn't end. So the fight or flight mechanism kicks in, but the parasympathetic, the end of the crisis, does not, because we are seeing this happen over and over and over. This threat is not a direct threat on our life, but our body doesn't understand that. All it understands is that this is an ongoing crisis. Now, what happens with an ongoing crisis? This brings us to stress. So stress is unending crisis circles. It is when the mind does not understand or does not perceive an end to a particular crisis. So you continue to live it day in and day out, which means that you are dealing with being in that state of fight or flight, and this can go on for years. And I have actually seen people that have been in that state of fight or flight, survival space, survival focused for a long time because of the amount of crisis that has just gone on and on and on and on. So crisis, let me be clear on this, yeah? Crisis is different to a challenge. How? In a challenge, you think you can handle it, okay? You look at the situation, you assess it, and you believe that you can handle it. Crisis is when you cannot handle it, all right? So imagine the feeling of being in a situation that you feel you can't handle, and not only that you can't handle it, but you cannot come out of it, even worse. So a series of stresses, okay, ongoing stress can keep you in that place. And because of rule-based living, so going back to the idea that we now live in a rule-based community society, right, we cannot express this out because a natural way of expression instinctively would not be considered appropriate or moral. So if I cannot express it, especially if I cannot express it in the moment, I want to punch my boss right now. He's infuriating me, but I can't, right? Because there's going to be very much deep repercussions for that. It's not considered acceptable in that moment. So what do? I internalize that anger. I internalize that frustration. I repress it in my body because there is an instinct behavior that I wish to react and I cannot. So that emotion, which we understand as emotion, if we separate the word, means energy in motion. Emotion, energy in motion. That energy in motion will find a home hostage. So it's actually acts like a hostage that takes over the body. So it finds a home in your body. Now, where can that home be? It can be any of the organs. It can be the heart. It can be the kidneys. It can be the lungs. It can be the pancreas. And now, all of a sudden, I have high blood pressure. Now I have diabetes. Now I have cancer. Now I have fatty liver, etc., etc., etc. So most modern diseases have grown at a more rapid pace than technological evolution. So does this make sense so far? Okay, before we get to the next part. So again, going back over very briefly, we go from instinct-based living to rule-based living. Rules create structure and structure-based living. Primary instincts get repressed. We move into repression of emotions. Yeah, emotions move into your body when they are repressed. That is where you keep the emotion. Some people think it's kept in the mind. It's not. It's kept in the body. The awareness of the emotion is in the mind. The actual presence of the emotion is in the body because you feel it in your body. So these emotions locate which organ they want to romance, and that's where the story ends. Okay. Now, in high levels, we work with psychoimmunoaccess, where emotions, they find, and research actually shows that certain emotions, because each emotion has a specific frequency, and certain emotions will pertain to certain organs. So a certain emotion will have a common trait with a specific organ. So as an example, you'd be able to look at somebody, and if they say they have diabetes, you would straight away know what emotion would be behind that issue. Okay. So there's clear correlations, and obviously this is a developing progress. They're understanding this more and more now in scientific research, working more on the brain, understanding the link, and there's a lot of research out there that you can read about, and it's fascinating. So hopefully one day this will be more of a norm, this will be more of an understanding of how emotions are linked to disease. So when it becomes a problem, activate the stress response. We activate the stress response in the modern world, okay? And this is where we're seeing it take a slightly different turn, but nothing has actually changed in the body. Nothing has changed in terms of the fight or flight mechanism. It does exactly still what it intends to do. The only difference is that now the threats are no longer the same, and repression has started to become a day-to-day part of our lives. So now, as I said, what was once the animal becomes emails from the boss, becomes your mother-in-law, becomes stress from a colleague, becomes your partner. It's constant, and it activates that stress response. Fight with your boyfriend, initiate stress response. You look at your bank statement or you look at your bills for the month and realize that maybe you're going to be surviving on a little less, initiate stress response. So there are so many of these what the mind and the body consider to be stresses that are actually not directly linked or potential threats to your survival, but they are taken on as threats the same way that literal life threats were taken on in the primitive age. Now, in the areas where the autonomous nervous system doesn't kick in appropriately, this is when we experience a panic attack. So panic attacks are when the parasympathetic nervous system does not kick in, specifically the parasympathetic, which is that part of the whole process that allows your body to return to calm, right? Allows your body to return to homeostasis. So what does that mean? If they're in a panic attack, parasympathetic hasn't kicked in. So fight and flight has kicked in. Parasympathetic has not, which means that the person's mind is in the process that they are still going through a crisis. There's a belief that the crisis is ongoing, okay? Though in reality, the crisis is over, but something in the mind is keeping it stuck, okay? And this is when we experience a panic attack. This is also why when you see someone who's having a panic attack, someone will come along and slap them. You'll always see someone who comes along with the slap as the solution. And that's, what's that actually doing? And we don't even know what we're doing when we slap someone. We just think that if we slightly, you know, maybe not slightly, not everybody is gentle, but for those that, you know, do hit or hit the side of the face or hit the top of the head, what are you actually trying to do? Although you may not be aware of it in the moment, you're trying to induce the parasympathetic. So you're trying to hit the body by saying, you know, crisis over, wake up, kick in. And then that's when you see someone go, oh, okay, cool, got it. Okay, process, right? And that's when the body calms down. Now, many corporations understood this really well. So this is not really, I would say, a modern understanding. This has been going on for quite a few years now. Of course, research is developing and more countries and cultures are becoming aware of this, but it has been around, and some cultures have really taken it to another level in terms of its effectiveness. One of these countries is Japan. So after World War II, it became obviously quite a damaged country beyond repair. It took over 40 years for essentially Japan to rebuild itself and then to become a supreme power, right? In 1964, it was considered to be a supreme power alongside the US. Now, there is a corporation in Japan, I think it's called Matsushita, I could be wrong though, but in terms of my pronunciation, but they own Panasonic. So this is the brand that owns Panasonic. We know Panasonic is worldwide in terms of an electronic brand. Now, they introduced in their workforce in Japan, they actually introduced a bamboo stick management approach. So this is what it was called. Now, what did it mean? It's quite a funny thing actually, and you can still see it today if you visit Japan, is that in the basements of these corporations, they would have cutouts of the boss, you know, someone that was like a stress initiator. So like the big boss, you know, the manager, they would have these cutouts of these bosses, and they would encourage, you know, once or twice a day, these employees, anyone who's suffering with stress, they would bring them down to the basement, they would provide them with the bamboo stick, and they would encourage them to beat the hell out of these cutouts. So they would just let them release the repressed emotion. So they'd give them maybe 10 minutes just to continue whacking, get that stress, that anger, that frustration out. Within 10 minutes, these employees would come back to the office. And what they noticed after researching and analyzing the pattern of this was that these employees that had those 10 minutes just to release that repressed emotion came back to the office with peak productivity, absolute peak productivity. Now, if you have a situation where a disturbed employee, right, who doesn't have this outlet, they get stressed out, they have a very stressful day at work, they are not able to take it out in a healthy way, or even a way that allows them to, you know, at least somewhat release a part of that repressed emotion. So they go home, they have a long day, they go home, and it actually takes 72 hours to come back to peak performance. So if you have a very stressful morning at work and you have a special or very important meeting in the afternoon, a lot of that time you're not going to recover in a matter of hours. And this is where disappointment kicks in, where you think, I could have done so much better in that moment. Why did I not give my better performance? I tried, just didn't come. So it actually shows that if you are dealing with stress and you are not finding an appropriate outlet, it can take up to 72 hours to come back and essentially regulate your body again if the stress is not dealt with at source. So in the moment that the stress is felt. Now, when stress is felt, what actually happens? First thing it does is it closes down the conscious mind to creativity, focus, and productivity. So stress keeps you in survival mode. What do I need to do to get to the next step? Whether it's what do I need to do to get to the end of the day? What do I need to do to get to the end of the week? What do I need to do to get to the end of the month or the end of this year? So you're just constantly focused on how do I get through this? You're not focused on building yourself. You're not focused on creating. You're not focused on, productivity and getting better. You're just focused on survival. And this is why we look at people sometimes and we say they're on autopilot. They're just doing the same thing. There's no motivation. There's nothing happening. Why? This is what you're seeing under the covers. Okay? So the body's inherent wisdom allows this process to occur for crisis, right? But now the problem moves into the mind, and this is where it becomes a double crisis, because now we have the development of the mind, okay? So now we have memory. So the crisis continues to become a memory, which is why crisis can continue months or years down the line after some initial response has actually happened, because now we have the memory of it. So that works for us and that works against us in a way. So essentially it keeps focused and it keeps on going. And this is where the concept of therapy comes in, where you go to a therapist with the understanding that this is what I'm experiencing stress. You may feel like now at that point, stress may have moved to panic attacks, anxiety, but essentially this is where we trace and find the origin, because it has started somewhere where a lot of repressed emotion, that cycle has since perpetuated, where the repressed emotion keeps getting repressed, no physical outlet, no way to release, and the pattern continues and continues and continues. Okay, so before we get into some resources and things that we can do, does this make sense for everybody? You can just maybe write it in the chat, or any questions for now, like before we go into a little bit of management, anything that anyone wants clarified or anything else while I catch my breath. Okay, I see your question, Kritika. Could suppression of emotions for a long time even lead to chronic pain? Could it absolutely does. I wouldn't even say could, it does 100% of the time. Chronic pain is actually the primal cause that you're looking for in chronic pain is trauma in the body. Trauma, which of course starts with a disturbed emotion. So absolutely, chronic essentially means that nothing, in most cases when people have a chronic disorder and they go to a doctor, they find that there's no solution, right? So it's deemed chronic, which means it's just something that you have to live with. Of course, you can manage it, but there's no cure implied. But what you're actually seeing in a chronic disorder is years and years of repression. So this is not something that would have started 6 months ago. If you're looking at a chronic disorder, you're looking at something that has potentially been going on since childhood. So it's a long process there. Not to say though that it's a helpless situation. It can 100% be sorted and looked at and worked on in therapy. Okay, now in therapy, obviously the more severe the chronic pain and the longer that this has been going on, we don't make any kind of irrational promises in therapy that things can completely be cured. But what I can tell you personally is through experience that I've seen with my clients and also experiences that I have seen other hypnotherapists go through with their clients, is that some chronic disorders make huge improvements after working on repression of emotion. So do miracles happen? Absolutely. So it's always let's say a pathway to be open to. If you or yourself or if anyone that you know deals with chronic disorders or chronic pain, and they've tried just about everything and nothing has worked, this is a good avenue to try, because you never know what may come up.
Excuse me, Jessica, I have a question.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So if this is the situation that, suppression of emotions leads to chronic pain, and if the person is on medication and it's improving very slowly, and there is nothing majorly wrong physiologically, but the pain still persists for months and months, and you've tried everything, like you're saying, Reiki and theta healing and all kinds of things. It's all working very slowly, but not to the point that you're really seeing major improvements. What kind of would hypnotherapy be like, the modalities that you mentioned? Out
Yes.
of those, the ones that you do in your one-to-one sessions, out of those, which ones would you recommend to someone who is dealing with something like this? Would hypnotherapy be a good avenue to try to maybe just let out those suppressed emotions which have been collected for so long. And um, like you
Yes.
said, miracles happen. And of course, it differs from person to person. I'm sure the time taken is different, but what would
Mm.
be a good thing to try? I wanted to ask you that.
No, please, thank you very much for your question, and I'm absolutely happy to advise you on that. So if we're seeing a chronic issue, more so chronic pain, physiologically there's not so much of a problem, or it's not as bad, that what's really sticking is the chronic pain. So the medication, of course, all of these things that, may be helping to manage the pain. And of course, you're going to have good days and you're going to have bad days, but the whole point is that the pain remains, right? So day in and day out, the pain is there, maybe at different levels, but it's not going. So yes, absolutely. To answer your question straight out, yes, hypnotherapy is a great modality. Reiki is another great one because you're working with energies. But the great thing about hypnotherapy, and I'm someone who is absolutely pro all holistic methods, so it's only about finding what works for you. But the great thing about hypnotherapy is that not only are you engaging the part of your mind where the answers are, so chronic pain. Has everyone heard of the acronym for pain, which is that it's all about pay attention inwards now? So pain is a language which is telling you go in, look inwards, okay? There is something that you have repressed that you are either not willing to look at, or maybe you are completely absent to it. So in some cases, and in many cases with clients that I've worked with, things have come up that they have been completely unaware of. It's very, very old memories, things that have happened, experiences that at that time might have seemed very minor, and it's come up again, and it's actually shown them that it's more significant than what they realize. So sometimes there's a lot of awareness of what it might be, and sometimes there's very little awareness. But pain is always a language. So it is telling us something. And the way to understand what that is to look inwards, especially chronic pain. Now, guys, remember, of course, there's a logic to this. So as an example, you cut your finger, okay? And you feel pain. Now, is this about a case of you should hold your finger and meditate and go, what's the trying to? Of course not, because in this case, we have a physical injury. So we need a doctor, okay? We need to go to an emergency room. We need to actually, like when we're dealing with physical cuts and ailments and things that there's logic to it, okay? You hit your head hurts, logic. So there's no necessary need to go into the psychological or psychosymptomatic side of that. It's you go, you see a doctor, you have an injury, you get sorted, and then you're better, right? Where pain is different is when we're dealing with pain where there's no logic behind it. So pain that just starts in the body, a moving pain, a stagnant pain, you get a pain in the stomach, start getting pains in the chest. They do scans for you and nothing shows up. And that's when you hear the story, but doctors keep telling me it's all in your head, because there's nothing showing up on ultrasound, nothing showing up on MCG, nothing showing up on the EEG, nothing at all, nothing showing up in ultrasounds, in whatever it may be, right? In MRIs, nothing showing up. So then you're dealing with a case where the body is not showing logic behind the pain. So there's nothing to show for the pain, right? Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's in your head, because we still know that emotions get attached to parts in the body. So we always validate the experience by saying, even though it's not showing up in the body, it's very real. The only difference is that because there's no route to heal it through the body, heal it through the mind. Okay? So, but both experiences are completely valid and validated. Sorry, just to quickly finish that one. Who's about to go? Rua? Okay. Bye, love, no worries. If you need to contact me or you have any other questions, please feel free. Illuminations has my contact. And yes, for ADHD as well, everything can be looked through hypnotherapy, just to give you a brief understanding. If you want more information, do let me know, yeah? Sorry, to finish that question, yes, so hypnotherapy is a great technique for any pain where there is no logic behind it, okay? Where the pain has been on for a while, maybe physically there has been an issue, but the issue is actually not there, or it's improved, but the pain continues. Then you're looking at a language behind the pain, which is trying to convey a message. So what does hypnotherapy do? It goes straight to that source and understands what is what may be the trauma or the experience. And by the way, guys, trauma is a very scary word. Trauma doesn't have to be something major, like abuse. A lot of people feel like they get scared of that word, because then they say, oh, but I haven't experienced any trauma per se. But trauma can be something very simple. It can be something as simple as one day you lost your mother in the supermarket for 5 minutes. That's a trauma for a child. Or one day you went on a holiday and you forgot, you forgot maybe your favorite toy, and your favorite toy was your biggest comfort in that time in your life. That can be a trauma. So trauma can be something very, very small, okay? But whatever it is, whatever the experience is, it has created a response with which you needed to suppress emotions at the time. And that can simply be because you didn't understand what you were feeling. Something as simple as that. So the repression can start, it continues, the pattern continues, the pain grows, and it's a way to alert you to that experience. So
Yeah,
yes,
no, exactly. Yeah, this is what I wanted to know. Thank you for answering that.
you're so welcome,
Because
love. So yeah.
because physiologically, it's just, all the scans, everything is just showing just meningeal inflammation and nothing else. And the doctor keeps telling me, to try natural remedies, exercise, and things like that. But when you have chronic pain, it's hard to exercise, right? It hurts even
Absolutely.
more. So then
Absolutely.
it's like a counter effect. So I don't
Counterproductive.
really, yeah. So it's hard to do, which is why I was wondering. And obviously, YouTube has plenty of resources, and we don't know, as normal people, we don't know which ones are legit and what to try in the night. When you're in that much pain, you're desperate to try anything, right? You,
Yes.
you just go through YouTube, hypnotherapy or hypnosis, sleep hypnosis videos, and you try to sleep it off and things like that. But all those things just help temporarily, they don't really go to the source and remove what has actually started this and why has it persisted for so long. So
Absolutely.
that's why I was asking, but thanks for answering my question.
You're very welcome. I definitely recommend that you try. Have a think about it and look, see
Yeah.
it as it's always good to and nice to just see it as a new strategy, a new thing that you're trying, right? Because at the end, your
Yeah.
goal is to rid yourself of the pain. And the beautiful thing about it is, and I really take my hat off to you, because that is the biggest step in realizing that you want more for yourself. You're
Yeah, no,
not,
for sure,
because
for sure.
so many of us, we have these situations, we have these sort of bodily inflections, and a lot of the time the assumption is that this is just something I have to live with. And that's not the case. That's never the case. And it's such a disempowering belief. So I love hearing these questions and these inquiries, because this tells me that something in your mind is saying, I don't have to continue living this way. I can sort it
No,
out.
absolutely not. And I know,
So
and I definitely would like to take the one-to-one consultation with you. Then I can tell you more about it, and then
please do so. Contact Illuminations. We'll sort this out.
yeah.
Okay?
Thanks so
Brilliant.
much, Jessica.
So you're very welcome, love. So, okay, we have 1 minute, guys. So all I'm going to do, main focus now, is now that we've all understood this, we understood about repression of emotion, first thing to do, okay? In any moment when you experience stress, the first thing is about acknowledging what it is that's going on with you right now, okay? I teach this to all my clients, and just giving you this experience today is the first thing is to say, what is my body trying to tell me, okay? What do I need right now in this moment? All right, this is when you feel stressed. If you feel a panic attack coming on, acknowledge what you're feeling and ask your body what it is that you are feeling right now. This is transformational. Speak to your body. Body talk is the most effective technique to use in the moment, because your body is speaking to you anyway. So it's about whether you're actually willing to take the moment to listen. Of course, practice breathing techniques is another great one to deal with stress. And if any of you want to come and do a consultation with me, I can teach you some of those techniques. And the last thing, and the most important thing I'm going to leave it on, is ensure that you always, 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 always express emotions in the healthiest way that you can. Okay, get into the habit of moving or completely releasing repressing emotions. So in the moment, bring a sense of power to your tears. Bring a sense of power to punching pillows and screaming into a pillow if you need to, and picking up the phone and calling a friend when you need to vent in that moment, not thinking, oh, I'm not going to do it now, I'll do it later, because in that moment you are feeling that emotion. So go with it, feel it, and then do what is instinctual to you. Now, of course, in again, civilized days, I'm not going to tell you go out and punch someone if that's what you feel like doing, but find healthy ways to release your emotions. This is the biggest advice I'm going to give you today. It changes your life. Always focus on acting what it is that you're feeling in the moment, and find healthy ways to process it, even if it means that you have a breathing strategy, that you know the minute you feel this way, you start changing your breath and you breathe in a certain pattern, because even this is releasing the emotion. So even that is effective. And again, if any of you come and see me, I will teach you any and all of the breathing techniques that you need. You just book a consultation and we'll go over this, because I think this is something everyone should know. And I might even do a separate webinar on that at some point, on breathing techniques for stress that everyone should have the knowledge of, so that it's a resource that you can grab at any time. Okay, perfect. Brilliant. So yes, we'll do another webinar on that, Kritika, for sure. And I have quite a few more webinars planned, hopefully for next month. So I look forward to hopefully all of you coming. Most of these next ones for next month will be in person, because I do like the nice interaction, but for this one, the webinar just worked out a little better. So especially when it's not as interactive. So thank you very much all for coming. Okay, I'm going to leave it here so that we don't go over the hour, but thank you once again for spending your evening with me. I hope this was all useful information for you. Gives you a little bit of background into why we are the way we are, where we've come from, and understanding this very, very pivotal part of our minds, so that you can make it work for you and not against you. Okay? Love to all of you. Thank you so much once again. I hope to see all of you in the center at some point soon. And have a lovely evening, and take care of yourselves, okay? Please stay safe. Okay? Good night. Bye-bye.